Have you ever wondered why some animals seem afraid of things that human eyes cannot see? Hello beautiful people, welcome to African Tales by Kara, where every story has a lesson, every character has a purpose, and every ending leaves you thinking. Let's begin. This happened many years ago in a quiet village called Omodike. The people there lived simple lives. They farmed, traded in the market, and gathered every evening under the old Iruko tree to share stories. But everyone obeyed one important rule. No one stayed outside after sunset. The elders believed that when darkness covered the land, spirits wandered through the village. Most people laughed about those stories during the day, but once night came, every door was locked. Among the villagers was a young farmer named Carlo. At 25 years old, Carlo was known for one thing: his kind heart. After losing his father, he worked hard to care for his widowed mother, Mama Ngozi. They were not wealthy, but they never refused to help anyone in need. One evening, Carlo closed his small market stall and began walking home with a bucket of fresh water. Halfway through the journey, the weather suddenly changed. Dark clouds covered the sky. The wind became fierce. Leaves spun widely across the dusty road. The first drops of rain fell, followed by a loud clap of thunder that shook the forest. Carlo pulled his wrapper tighter and hurried home. Then he heard it back. It was weak, almost lost beneath the sound of the rain. He stopped walking. Again, back. Following the sound, Carlo stepped off the road and walked toward a fallen tree. A flash of lightning lit up the forest. There, trapped beneath a heavy branch, was a black dog. Its fur was soaked. Its body was thin. One of its legs was pinned beneath the tree, but that caught Carlo's attention were its eyes. They were bright silver. The dog looked at him quietly, almost as if it was begging for help. Without thinking twice, Carlo searched for a long piece of wood. He pushed against the heavy branch with all his strength. The branch slowly rolled away. The dog pulled its injured leg free. Carlo smiled. "There you go. You're safe now." Instead of running away, the dog walked towards him and gently touched his hand with his nose. Carlo laughed. "So you're coming with me?" The dog waged its tails. Together, they walked back toward Omodike. As they entered the village, people stopped what they were doing. Women pulled their children closer. Men stared silently. An old woman gasped, "The silver eyes." Moments later, Eda Okori, the oldest man in the village, stepped forward. He looked at the dog for several seconds before turning to Carlo. "Where did you find it?" "Near the old forest road," Carlo replied. The elder's face changed immediately. "Take it back," Carlo frowned. "It was trapped. I couldn't leave it there." "You should have." The villagers became uneasy. "That dog doesn't belong here," someone whispered. "It brings bad luck," another said. Carlo looked down at the frightened animal. The dog remained calm. It did not bark. It did not growl. It simply stood beside him. "It hasn't harmed anyone," Carlo said firmly. "I'm keeping it until it recovers." Without waiting for another argument, he walked home. Mama Ngozi was surprised to see the dog but welcomed it after hearing what had happened. She cleaned its injured leg and placed food before it. The dog ate quietly before lying near the doorway. "You should give him a name," she said. Carlo smiled. "I will call him Shadow." That night, the rain stopped. The village became strangely silent. No insects chirped. No owls crowed. Just after midnight, back. Shadow jumped to his feet. He ran outside. Back, back, back. His loud barking echoed across the sleeping village. Carlo rushed after him. Shadow stood in the middle of the compound, staring at the lonely road leading into Omodike. His ears were raised. His body was stiff. He barked again and again. Carlo looked carefully. The road was empty. There was no traveler, no animal, nothing. After several minutes, Shadow suddenly stopped. He lowered his head quietly, returned inside the house. The rest of the night passed peacefully. Then, just after sunrise, a terrified scream echoed through the village. Everyone ran toward the old forest road. Kalu hurried after them, with Shadow close behind. When they arrived, the crowd stood frozen. Lying beside the dusty road was Eda Okore. He was dead. There was no blood, no wound, only fear frozen on his face. Silence filled the air. The one woman slowly looked at Shadow. Her voice shook as she whispered, "The dog barked here last night." Another man took a slow step backward. He stared at Shadow's silver eyes quietly, said, "Maybe the dog wasn't barking at nothing." The death of Eda Okori changed Omodike forever. No one could explain what had happened. His body had no wounds. There were no footprints around him. It was as if fear alone had stolen his life. But the villagers were certain of one thing. The black dog had something to do with it. As Kalu and Shadow walked back home, people quickly moved out of their way. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Some men refused to greet Kalu, while others whispered behind his back, "That dog is cursed. It brought death into our village. They should send it away before another person dies." Kalu heard every word, but he ignored them. Deep inside, he knew Shadow was not evil. If the dog wanted to harm people, why had it waited quietly until someone else was in danger? That question stayed in his mind all day. The following afternoon, Mama Ngozi prepared to visit her younger sister in the next village. "I won't be long," she told Kalu. "I will return before sunset." She picked up a small basket and started walking toward the old wooden bridge that crossed the river. Shadow, who had been sleeping under a mango tree, suddenly jumped to his feet. His ears stood upright, silver eyes fixed on the bridge. Then he backed. Back. He ran in front of Mama Ngozi and blocked the narrow path. "What is wrong with him?" she asked. She tried to walk around him. Shadow blocked her again. His barking became louder. Kalu hurried over. "Maybe we should wait a little." His mother smiled. "Kalu, it's only a dog." She took another step. Shadow gently grabbed the edge of her wrapper with his mouth and pulled her backward. At that very moment, crack! The old wooden bridge slipped into two. Within seconds, it collapsed into the rushing river below. Mama Ngozi covered her mouth in shock. If she had taken just 3 more steps, she would have been standing on that bridge. She slowly looked down at Shadow. The dog had stopped barking. He quietly sat beside Kalu as though nothing had happened. By evening, the whole village knew what had happened. This time, people were confused. "If the dog is evil," one woman said, "why did it save Mama Ngozi?" Another man shook his head. Maybe it knew the bridge would collapse. But how? Nobody had an answer. That night, the village chief called an emergency meeting. The elders sat beneath the old Iroko tree while villagers gathered around with lanterns. "We have 2 strange events in 2 days. The chief said, "First, Eda Okore dies after the dog barks. Then the same dog saves a woman's life." The people argued among themselves. Some wanted Shadow driven into the forest. Others believed the dog should stay. The meeting ended without any decision. As everyone returned home, Kalu noticed Shadow staring toward the western edge of the village. The dog wasn't barking. He was listening. Late that night, Kalu walked to the sound of the soft footsteps outside. He quietly opened the door. Shadow was already walking away. Without making a sound, Kalu followed him. The dog led him beyond the last house in the village, past the old market, until they reached the ancient cemetery. The moon shone brightly above the old graves. Shadow stopped beside a broken stone covered with weeds. His body became stiff. Then, he backed once. Silence. He backed again. A cold wind suddenly swept through the cemetery. Kalu wrapped his arms around himself. The air had become strangely cold. Then he saw her. A woman dressed completely in white and stood among the graves. Her long hair moved gently in the wind. She did not walk. She did not speak. She simply looked at Shadow. Then she slowly turned her eyes toward Kalu. His heart began to pound. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Kalu wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. The woman slowly lifted one hand, not to threaten him, but to point toward the village. Before Kalu could understand what she meant, she disappeared completely. The cemetery became silent again. Kalu looked around in disbelief. There was no one there. No footprints, no sound, only Shadow, still staring at the place where the woman had stood. Then, whispered, "The truth is still alive." Kalu grabbed Shadow's collar. "Let's go." The two hurried back toward Omodike without looking behind them. But neither of them noticed. Far away, at the edge of the cemetery, a pair of unseen eyes was quietly watching them. Kalu did not sleep for the rest of the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman dressed in white standing among the graves. Her face was filled with sadness, not anger, and those words kept echoing in his mind. The truth is still alive. Before sunrise, Kalu left his house with Shadow beside him. There was only one person in Omodike who might know what he had seen, Mama Adanna. She was the oldest woman in the village. Some people called her a herbalist, others believed she understood things that ordinary people could not. Her small hut stood deep inside a quiet grove of ancient trees. When Kalu arrived, Mama Adanna looked up from the herbs she was drying. "I've been expecting you," she said calmly. Kalu looked surprised. "You knew I was coming?" She smiled. "No. I knew the dog would bring someone here." Shadow quietly walked into the compound and lay beside her feet. The old woman gently stroked his head. Then she looked at Kalu. "You have seen her, haven't you?" Kalu slowly nodded. "The woman in white?" Mama Adana closed her eyes for a moment. Her name was Adeze. She invited Kalu to sit. Then she began a story the village had almost forgotten. 20 years ago, Adeze was one of the kindest people in Omodike. She cared for the sick, helped poor families, and never turned anyone away. But one terrible year, disease spread through the village. Crops failed, livestock died, fear filled every home. The people became desperate. They wanted someone to blame. Kalu listened silently. They accused Adeze of using dark powers. Kalu frowned. Was she guilty? Mama Adana shook her head. She was completely innocent. But fear is louder than truth. The villagers believed lies instead of evidence. Her voice became quiet, and she never returned. Silence filled the little hut. Kalu lowered his head. What happened to the people who accused her? They continued with their lives, but guilty never leaves the heart. Before Kalu could ask another question, Shadow suddenly stood up. His ears became stiff. Without warning, he ran out of the compound. "Shadow!" Kalu chased after him. The dog ran through the village until he stopped outside the largest compound in Omodike. It belonged to Chief Umosu. The chief was speaking with several elders when Shadow arrived. Instead of barking at the house, he barked directly at the chief. Bark, bark, bark. The conversation stopped immediately. Everyone stared. Chief Umosu smiled, disappeared. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Shadow refused to move. His silver eyes remained fixed on the chief. The barking grew louder. The chief took one slow step backward. His hands began to tremble. "Kalu," he shouted, "control your dog." Kalu hurried forward and gently held Shadow by the collar. "I'm sorry, Chief." But even while standing beside Kalu, Shadow continued staring at the old man. The villagers became whispering, "Why is the dog barking at the chief? Has it ever barked at a person before? This is the first time." Chief also forced a smile. "It is only an animal." But his voice lacked confidence. He quickly ended the meeting and disappeared inside his house. As Kalu walked away with Shadow, Mama Adana quietly whispered, "The dog never barks without a reason." That night, Chief Umosu could not sleep. He locked every door, closed every window. Then he walked to a wooden chest. hidden beneath his bed. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside were old papers tied with a faded red cloth. There was also a broken necklace and a small piece of white fabric stained with dried blood. The chief stared at them for a long time. Tears slowly filled his eyes. "I am sorry," he whispered. Outside, Shadow stood silently beneath a large tree. He was no longer backing. He was watching. A cold wind suddenly swept across the compound. Chief Nwosu looked toward his window. Standing just beyond the fence was the woman in white. She did not move. She simply looked at him. The chief's lantern slipped from his hand and crashed onto the floor. A frightened scream echoed through the night as Shadow raised his head and backed once more. The morning after Chief Nwosu's frightened scream, fear spread across Omodike like wildfire. No one knew why the chief had screamed in the middle of the night. When people asked him what had happened, he simply replied it was only a bad dream. But the villagers noticed something had changed. The once confident chief now looked worried. He barely left his house, and whenever he did, he looked over his shoulder as if someone was following him. Meanwhile, Shadow became even more alert. He spent most of his time watching the chief's compound. He no longer backed at empty roads. He backed whenever Chief Nwosu appeared. This only made the villagers more suspicious. The dog has become dangerous. It is targeting our chief. We should get rid of it before someone else dies. By afternoon, a stranger arrived in Omodike. He was a tall man dressed in a spotless white robe, carrying a carved wooden staff decorated with cowrie shells. Around his neck hung several charms. The moment he entered the village, people gathered around him. He smiled warmly. "My name is Ezakwo," he announced. "I traveled from village to village, helping people overcome evil spirits." The villagers exchanged hopeful looks. Perhaps this was the answer they had been waiting for. Chief Nwosu quickly welcomed the visitor. "Our village needs your help," he said. "Strange things have been happening." Ezakwo slowly looked around before asking one question. "Where is the black dog?" At that moment, Kalu walked into the square with Shadow beside him. The instant Shadow saw Ezakwo, his ears stood up. His body became stiff. Then he growled, a deep, angry growl. It was the first time Kalu had ever heard Shadow make such a sound. The village became silent. Ezakwo stared at the dog. For a brief moment, the smile disappeared from his face. Then it returned. "So," he whispered softly, "we met again." Kalu frowned. "What do you mean?" Ezakwo quickly laughed. "I meant, I have seen animals like this before." Shadow suddenly backed. Once, twice, 3 times. The stranger lifted his staff. "This dog carries darkness," he declared loudly. "It is the reason your village has lost its peace." Fear spread through the crowd. Some villagers immediately stepped away from Shadow. Others nodded in agreement. Only Kalu spoke. "That's not true. This dog has saved lives." Ezakwo looked at him calmly. Evil often disguises itself as kindness. The words frightened many people. An elder asked, "What should we do?" The stranger answered without hesitation, "The dog must be captured before sunset." Several young men immediately surrounded Shadow. Kalu stood in front of him. "You have got this all wrong." But no one listened. Shadow did not fight. He simply looked at Kalu as ropes were tied around his neck. The dog was taken to the village square and tied securely to the old Iroko tree. Kalu felt helpless. As evening approached, Ezakwo announced that he would perform a cleansing ritual after midnight. No one must leave their homes, he warned. If anyone interrupts the ritual, the spirits will become stronger. The villagers obeyed, but Kalu could not ignore the uneasy feeling in his heart. Long after everyone had gone inside, he quietly left his house, keeping a safe distance. He followed Ezakwo through the darkness. The stranger was not walking toward the village square.
He was heading straight for the abandoned shrine. Kalu hid behind thick bushes. He watched as Ezakwo looked around to make sure no one had followed him. Then the stranger reached inside his robe and removed a small clothes bundle. He carefully opened it. Inside was a broken necklace. It looked old, very old. Ezakwo smiled. "You have searched for this for 20 years, he whispered. "But tonight, everything ends." Kalu's heart raced. 20 years? The same number Mama Adanna had mentioned. Suddenly, a loud bark echoed through the forest. Bark, bark, bark. Kalu turned toward the sound. Somehow, Shadow had broken free. The black dog came running through the trees at full speed. The moment Ezakwo saw him, his confident face disappeared. For the first time, he looked afraid, real fear. "No," he whispered. "You found me again?" Shadow stopped between Ezakwo and the shrine. His silver eyes shone brightly in the darkness. He barked louder than ever before. A powerful wind rushed through the forest. The trees bent violently. The lantern beside Ezakwo suddenly went out. Everything became dark. Then, from inside the abandoned shrine, a familiar voice slowly echoed into the night. "Your lies end tonight." Kalu felt a chill run down his spine. The spirit had returned, but this time she was not coming for the village. She was coming for someone else. The cold voice echoed through the abandoned shrine. "Your lies end tonight." For a moment, nobody moved. The wind rolled through the trees, and the leaves swayed around Shadow as he stood firmly between Ezakwo and the entrance of the shrine. Kalu watched in silence. His heart pounded inside his chest. Slowly, a soft white light appeared inside the shrine. A woman dressed in white stepped into the moonlight. It was Adaeze. She looked peaceful, yet there was sadness in her eyes. She was not the terrifying spirit the villager has imagined. She looked like a woman who had waited many years for justice. Ezakwo stumbled backward. "No, stay away from me." Adaeze spoke calmly. "I waited 20 years for the truth. You cannot hide anymore." At that moment, lantern lights appeared in the distance. Chief Umunsu, Mama Adanna, and several villagers came running towards the shrine after hearing Shadow's loud barking. When they saw Adaeze standing before them, everyone froze. Some fell to their knees. Others could not speak. Chief Umunsu lowered his head. His face was filled with shame. Adaeze looked at him. "You know why I have returned?" Tears rolled down the old chief's face. "I know." Before anyone could speak again, Ezakwo pointed at Adaeze. "Don't listen to her," he shouted. "She is the curse." Shadow suddenly backed. Back. The sound echoed through the forest. Ezakwo's wooden staff slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. The charms tied around it broke apart. Mama Adanna stepped forward. "Enough lies." She looked directly at Ezakwo. "Tell them what happened." The stranger remained silent. Then Chief Umunsu spoke. "It is time." The old chief took a deep breath. 20 years ago, disease entered this village. The people were afraid. Ezakwo came here claiming he knew the cause. He told us Adaeze was a witch. The villagers looked at one another in shock. Chief Umunsu continued. "I believed him. So did everyone else. We condemned an innocent woman." His voice broke. "It was the greatest mistake of my life." The forest became silent. Ezakwo slowly lowered his head. "I lied," he admitted. "I knew Adaeze was innocent, but the people needed someone to blame. If they believed me, they would fear me, and fear gave me power." The villagers stared at him in disbelief. Mama Adanna closed her eyes. So many lives were destroyed because of one lie. Adaeze looked at the crowd. "I never returned for revenge. I returned because the truth was buried with me." She then looked at Shadow, and he never stopped searching for it. Everyone turned toward the black dog. For the first time, they understood. Shadow had never barked at spirits because he served them. He barked because he could see them. Every bark had been a warning. Every warning had been ignored. Carlos smiled through his tears. You were protecting us all this time. Shadow quietly waged his tail. Ezakwo suddenly turned and tried to run into the forest. Before he had taken more than a few steps, Shadow stood in front of him. The dog did not attack. He simply blocked his path. Ezakwo fell to his knees. I am sorry, he whispered. But his apology came 20 years too late. The villagers took him back to Omodike, where he confessed everything before the entire village. The truth spread quickly to the neighboring communities. Ezakwo never returned to deceive another village again. As the first rays of sunlight appeared above the hills, Adaeze smiled. The sadness on her face slowly disappeared. She looked at Kalu. Thank you for believing when others choose fear. Kalu bowed his head. I only listened to Shadow. Adaeze smiled one last time. Then her body slowly faded into the morning light until she was gone. A warm breeze passed through the village. For the first time in many years, the air felt peaceful. Carlos turned to smile at Shadow, but the dog was no longer there. He searched around the shrine, behind the trees, along the old path, nothing, only a trail of paw prints leading towards the rising sun. The footprints continued for several meters, then suddenly disappeared. Shadow was gone. Days later, the villagers gathered beneath the old Iroko tree. Chief Onwonsu publicly asked for forgiveness for the mistake he had carried for 20 years. Together, the people built a small stone monument beside the old shrine. It was not only for Adaeze, it was also for the faithful black dog who had refused to stop barking until the truth was finally revealed. From that day on, whenever someone spoke badly about another person without knowing the full story, the elders would simply smile and say, remember, the dog that barked at spirits, the one everyone feared, was the one sent to protect them. And even today, the oldest people in Omodike say that on every quiet night, when the wind blows gently through the trees, a single dog can still be heard barking somewhere beyond the old shrine, not because danger is coming, but because some guidance never truly leaves.